The metal floor felt cold beneath Helen Carter's feet as she stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber. She couldn't see the hundreds of alien representatives surrounding her in their elevated seats, but she could hear them, whispers in a dozen languages, the rustle of strange bodies shifting, the occasional hiss or chirp of species she had once dreamed of studying. Now they were her judges. Helen was a scientist. She had spent her whole life studying living things, trying to understand how life worked in all its strange forms across the galaxy. When Earth joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago, she had been one of the first humans chosen to work with alien species. It was supposed to be the greatest achievement of her career. Instead, it had become her nightmare. The Velkari ambassador stood to speak. Helen knew his voice well by now. It was smooth and cold, like ice sliding across metal. The Velkari were the Council's medical experts, the species every other race turned to when they had questions about biology or disease. They had held that position for 3,000 years, and they did not like being questioned. Dr. Helen Carter stands accused of spreading false information that caused panic across multiple worlds, the ambassador announced. His voice echoed through the chamber. She claimed to have discovered a dangerous parasite on our homeworld. She presented this information to other council members despite being told by Velkari experts that her findings were incorrect. Her actions insulted our expertise and violated council protocol. Helen wanted to speak, to defend herself one more time, but her lawyer, a human named Gregory Hunt, had advised her to stay silent. Earth's position on the council was still new and fragile. If she fought too hard, she might make things worse for her entire species. But staying silent felt like swallowing poison. She had found the parasite by accident while conducting a routine study of Velkari plant life. The organism was tiny, almost invisible, and it moved in ways that suggested intelligence. Helen had spent 6 months studying it in secret, running test after test until she was absolutely certain. The parasite could infect neural tissue. It could spread between species. And according to her models, it would begin showing symptoms in the Velkari population within 15 to 20 years. When she brought her findings to the Velkari Medical Authority, they dismissed her. A human, barely 5 years into galactic society, claiming to find something they had missed? Impossible, insulting. They told her to destroy her research and forget about it. Helen couldn't do that. She was a scientist. If she was wrong, she wanted to be proven wrong with evidence, not authority. So she took her research to other council members. She presented her data to the Talari, to the humans on the diplomatic staff, to anyone who would listen. That's when the Velkari invoked the ancient law. The law is clear. The Velkari ambassador continued. Any species that brings false testimony causing panic must offer one of their own for punishment. This ensures responsibility and prevents chaos. Admiral Claire Hughes, Earth's chief representative to the council, stood in the human section. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a face that rarely smiled. Helen had met her only twice before today, but she could hear the anger barely contained in the Admiral's voice when she spoke. The human government protests this application of the law, Hughes said. Dr. Carter is a respected scientist. Her research should be reviewed properly, not dismissed as false testimony without examination. The Velkari Medical Authority has examined it. The ambassador replied smoothly. They found no merit in her claims. The matter is settled. Then let other species examine it, Hughes insisted. Let independent researchers verify. The Velkari are the medical authority of this council, another voice interrupted. Helen thought it might be one of the Kresh representatives. For 3 millennia we have trusted them with matters of biological science. Are you suggesting we should doubt them now because one human disagrees? The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Helen felt her hope crumbling. Earth was too new, too weak, too desperate to maintain their council membership. They couldn't afford to make enemies of the established powers, not over one person. Gregory Hunt leaned close to Helen's ear. They're going to rule against us, he whispered. I'm sorry. Helen nodded slowly. She had known this was coming from the moment the Velkari made their accusation. The council wasn't interested in truth. They were interested in order, in maintaining the hierarchy that had existed for thousands of years. And humans were at the bottom of that hierarchy. However, Gregory continued, Admiral Hughes has negotiated one thing. If punishment must be given, you can volunteer yourself. It will prevent them from choosing another human randomly. Helen's throat tightened. What kind of punishment? Blinding, Gregory said quietly. The Velkari use neural technology. They'll burn out your visual cortex. It's permanent. No technology in council space can reverse it. For a moment, Helen couldn't breathe. To never see again. To lose the ability to look through a microscope. To watch cells divide and organisms grow. To see the stars she had spent her life studying. It felt like death, but the alternative was worse. If she refused, the Velkari would choose another human. Some innocent person who had nothing to do with her research would pay for her actions. She couldn't allow that. I volunteer, Helen said aloud, her voice steady despite the fear flooding through her. The chamber went quiet. You don't have to do this, Admiral Hughes said from across the room. Yes, I do, Helen replied. She turned her face toward where she thought the Velkari ambassador stood. I volunteer myself for punishment. Let no other human suffer for my actions. The vote was quick. The council accepted her volunteer status. The Velkari would administer the punishment within 3 days, and then Helen would be returned to Earth. The session ended with the sound of the council president's gavel striking metal. As guards led Helen from the chamber, Admiral Hughes caught up to her in the corridor. The older woman's hand gripped Helen's shoulder firmly. We won't forget this, Hughes said, her voice low and intense. Earth doesn't abandon its people. Someday, somehow, we'll make this right. Helen wanted to believe her, but she couldn't imagine how. Earth was one small planet in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations. What power did they have to change anything? 3 days later, Helen lay on a medical table while Velkari technicians attached neural devices to her head. The last thing she saw before the darkness came was the cold, satisfied expression on the lead technician's face. Then there was pain, bright and sharp, followed by absolute nothing. When Helen woke, the world was gone. Not dark, not black, just gone. The part of her brain that processed sight had been destroyed. She would never see again. They sent her back to Earth on a transport ship. She spent the journey locked in her cabin, touching her own face, feeling tears slide down cheeks she could no longer see in a mirror. Somewhere in her luggage was her research still unread, still dismissed as false. Helen Carter had told the truth and the galaxy had blinded her for it. But she was wrong about one thing. Earth did have power. Not yet, but they were learning. And they had very long memories. 15 years passed like water through Helen's fingers. She lived alone in a small cabin in Montana, far from the cities where people might recognize her name. Her brother Daniel visited every week, bringing groceries and news from the world she could no longer see. An AI assistant read scientific journals to her in a pleasant, genderless voice, but Helen rarely asked it to anymore. What was the point? She couldn't conduct research. She couldn't look through a microscope. She couldn't do the work she had been born to do. Most days she sat on her porch and listened to the wind moving through the pine trees. She had memorized the sounds of her small world. The creak of the third step on her porch, the way the screen door rattled when the wind came from the north, the particular rhythm of Daniel's footsteps on the gravel path. She tried not to think about the parasite, about whether it had emerged yet on the Velkari homeworld, about whether anyone had died because the council ignored her warnings. Thinking about it made her angry, and anger was exhausting when you lived in permanent darkness. But on a cold morning in March, Daniel's footsteps came faster than usual up the path. Helen, he said, slightly out of breath. Helen, you need to hear this. What's wrong? Helen stood from her chair, orienting herself by the sound of his voice. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Turn on the news feed. Daniel's hand found hers, pressing a tablet into her palm. AI, play the Galactic News Network main broadcast. The AI complied immediately. A reporter's voice filled the air, speaking in the clipped, formal tones used for council announcements. Confirms that the outbreak has now spread to 4 worlds. The Velkari Medical Authority issued a statement this morning, acknowledging that the parasite matches the description provided by human scientist Dr. Helen Carter 15 years ago. Death toll estimates range from 2 million to 5 million across affected populations. The Velkari government has requested emergency assistance from all council members. Helen's breath caught in her throat. It happened, she whispered. It finally happened. Exactly as you predicted, Daniel said. His voice carried a strange mixture of vindication and grief. Your timeline was perfect. 15 to 20 years, you said. It's been 15 years and 3 months since your trial. Helen sank back into her chair. Millions dead. She had tried to warn them. She had sacrificed her sight to make them listen, and they still hadn't believed her until it was too late. The anger she had been suppressing for 15 years rose up like a wave. "Did they mention me by name?" she asked. "Yes," the council issued a formal statement. "They're calling it the Carter parasite now. They've requested access to your original research. After they made me destroy it." "You didn't destroy it," Daniel reminded her gently. "You gave me a copy, remember?" Helen had almost forgotten. The night before her punishment, she had handed Daniel a data chip containing all her research files. Just in case, she had told him. Just in case someday it mattered. "Earth's government has the files," Daniel continued. "Admiral Hughes kept them secure all these years. And Helen, there's more. The Velkari tried to develop a treatment on their own. But they're failing. The parasite is more complex than they expected. They need help." "Let them suffer," Helen said bitterly. "The people dying aren't the ones who blinded you," Daniel said quietly. "They're just people, Helen, like you and me." Helen knew he was right, but it didn't make the anger disappear. She stood again, pacing the length of her porch, her hand trailing along the railing she knew by touch. "What does Earth want from me?" she asked finally. "Admiral Hughes wants to meet with you. She's coming here, actually. Should arrive this afternoon." Helen laughed without humor. "The Admiral herself. I must be important again." When Admiral Hughes arrived, Helen heard the sound of multiple vehicles, not just one. Security, probably. Maybe reporters. She stayed inside until Daniel brought the Admiral to her door. "Dr. Carter," Hughes said. Her voice had aged, grown rougher, but Helen recognized it immediately. "Thank you for seeing me." "I don't have much choice, do I?" Helen said. She gestured vaguely at the interior of her cabin. "Come in, sorry about the mess. I can't see it to clean it." "Your home is fine," Hughes said. Helen heard her sit down in the chair near the fireplace. "I'll be direct. The Council has formally requested Earth's assistance with the parasite outbreak. They're desperate. The Velkari can't solve this on their own, and you want my research when we have your research. We've had scientists studying it for years. We want you." Helen turned toward the Admiral's voice. "I'm blind. What use am I? You're the only person who truly understands this organism. We have a team ready to work under your direction. We can be your eyes, your hands, but we need your mind. Why should I help them?" Helen asked. "They destroyed my life. Because millions of people are dying," Hughes said simply. "And because Earth has conditions." Helen sat down slowly. "What kind of conditions?" "We'll provide your research and your expertise. In exchange, the Council must publicly exonerate you. They must acknowledge that you were right, that your punishment was unjust, and that you were a victim of political suppression. They must issue a formal apology. They'll never agree to that." "They already have," Hughes said, and Helen could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "The Kresh are threatening to leave the Council over this. 3 other species have filed formal complaints against the Velkari Medical Authority. The Council is fracturing. They need Earth's help badly enough to swallow their pride." Helen felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. "When?" "The exoneration hearing is scheduled for next week. After that, if you agree, we'll transport you to the research facility in Geneva. We've assembled the best team on Earth to work with you." "I can't see," Helen said again, but this time it sounded less like an objection and more like a statement of fact that needed acknowledgement. "I know," Hughes said gently, "but Dr. Carter, you could work by voice alone and still be more valuable than any other scientist we have. This is your field, your discovery, your vindication." Vindication. The word hung in the air between them. "I want to be there," Helen said finally. "At the hearing. I want to hear them say it." "Of course." 1 week later, Helen stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber. 15 years had passed, but the sounds were the same. The whispers, the rustling of alien bodies, the echo of voices against metal walls. But this time Helen wasn't alone. Daniel stood beside her, his hand steady on her arm. Admiral Hughes stood on her other side. The Council President spoke first, his translated voice formal and stiff. "The Galactic Council hereby acknowledges that Dr. Helen Carter of Earth was unjustly punished for research that has proven to be accurate and valuable. Her warnings were dismissed in error. The punishment administered was inappropriate and excessive. The Council formally apologizes for this miscarriage of justice." The Velkari ambassador spoke next, though Helen noticed he was not the same ambassador from her trial. The Velkari government extends its deepest apologies to Dr. Carter. We acknowledge that our pride prevented us from examining her research fairly. We failed in our duty as medical authorities, and we accept the consequences of that failure." Helen stood silent, letting the words wash over her. She had imagined this moment for 15 years, but now that it was happening, she felt strangely empty. An apology couldn't give her back her sight. It couldn't return the years she had lost, but it could give her back her purpose. "I accept your apology," Helen said clearly, "and I will help you stop this parasite. Not because you deserve it, but because the people dying deserve someone who will fight for them." The chamber erupted in discussion, but Helen barely heard it. She was already thinking about the research, about the organism she had discovered so long ago, about the work that lay ahead. Daniel squeezed her arm gently. "Ready to save the galaxy?" he whispered. Helen smiled for the first time in years. "I've been ready for 15 years. The research facility in Geneva was nothing like Helen's cabin in Montana. Instead of silence and pine trees, she heard the constant hum of equipment, the quick footsteps of scientists hurrying between labs, the soft beeping of computers processing data. Daniel helped her navigate the corridors during those first few days. But Helen was determined to learn the layout by memory. She worked with a team of 12 researchers, directing them by voice as they examined the parasite under microscopes she couldn't use. They described what they saw, and Helen translated those descriptions into understanding. Her mind still worked perfectly, even if her eyes didn't. Within 2 weeks, they had identified the parasite's reproductive cycle. Within a month, they understood how it spread between species. But developing a cure would take longer. Maybe years, and people were dying every day. Helen spent her mornings in the lab and her afternoons in meetings with council representatives, explaining progress through video calls she couldn't see. She spoke to empty air, trusting that someone was listening on the other end. It was exhausting and frustrating, but it was also purposeful. She was doing what she had been trained to do. On a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after arriving in Geneva, Helen was summoned to a meeting she hadn't scheduled. Daniel guided her to a conference room and helped her into a chair. "Dr. Carter," a man's voice said from across the table, "my name is Marcus Webb. I lead the Neural Research Division here at the facility." "I've heard of your work," Helen said. "You developed the new neural interface for paralysis patients." "That's right. Dr. Carter, I want to talk to you about something that isn't related to the parasite. It's about you specifically." Helen felt herself tense. "What about me?" "My team has been working on neural regeneration technology for the past 12 years. It's designed to rebuild damaged neural tissue at the cellular level. We've had success with spinal injuries, stroke damage, and degenerative diseases, but we've never attempted to regenerate a visual cortex that was deliberately destroyed." Helen's hand gripped the edge of the table. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "We believe we can restore your sight," Marcus said carefully. "The technology uses specialized nanites that follow your genetic blueprint to rebuild the damaged tissue. It's not simple and it's not without risk, but we'd like to try if you're willing." Helen couldn't speak. For 15 years, she had accepted her blindness as permanent. The Velkari had told her it was irreversible. Council medical experts had confirmed it. She had built a life around that certainty, had learned to function in darkness, had stopped dreaming about colors and faces and stars. "How certain are you?" she asked finally. 70%, Marcus said honestly. "We've run simulations using brain scans from your medical records before the punishment. The damage is extensive, but it follows predictable patterns. The nanites should be able to map and rebuild the tissue, but there are variables we can't fully predict until we try. And if it fails, you'd still be blind. But you wouldn't be worse off than you are now." Daniel's hand found hers on the table, squeezing gently. "It's your choice, Helen. No one will blame you if you say no." Helen sat in silence, thinking. Part of her was terrified. What if the procedure failed? What if it gave her hope and then crushed it? What if she learned to want sight again only to lose it a second time? But another part of her, the part that had studied biology her entire life, understood something fundamental. Life didn't give up. Life adapted, evolved, pushed forward against every obstacle. She had survived 15 years of darkness. She had been vindicated by the very people who tried to silence her. She had started working again, contributing again, mattering again. Maybe it was time to hope again, too. "I'll do it," Helen said. The procedure was scheduled for 3 days later. Helen spent that time preparing mentally, trying not to get her hopes up while simultaneously unable to stop imagining what it would be like to see again. Daniel stayed with her the night before, reading to her from one of her favorite books like he used to do when they were children. "Are you scared?" he asked when they finished the chapter. "Terrified," Helen admitted. "What if I can't remember how to see? What if everything looks wrong?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Daniel said simply. "Like we always do." The morning of the procedure, Marcus explained the process one more time. They would sedate her completely, then introduce the nanites through a direct neural injection. The nanites would spend approximately 60 hours mapping and rebuilding her visual cortex, guided by her genetic patterns and brain structure. She would wake up during the process several times for neural monitoring, but she wouldn't be aware of it. "When you finally wake up properly, the nanites will be finished, but your brain will need time to adjust," Marcus explained. "You might see nothing at first. That's normal. It can take hours or even days for the neural pathways to fully activate." "I understand," Helen said. She lay back on the medical table, feeling the cold surface beneath her. "Let's do this." The sedative flowed into her bloodstream and darkness came quickly. But this darkness felt different. It felt temporary. Helen woke to the sound of soft beeping and the smell of disinfectant. She kept her eyes closed, not ready to face the answer yet. She could feel bandages wrapped around her head, could hear people moving quietly around her. "Helen," Daniel's voice soft and hopeful. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," she said. Her throat felt dry. "Is it done?" "It's done. The nanites completed their work 6 hours ago. Marcus says everything looks good on the scans." Helen took a deep breath. "I'm afraid to look, I know. Take your time." But Helen had never been good at waiting. She had spent 15 years in darkness. What was a few more seconds of fear compared to that? She opened her eyes. At first there was nothing. Just the same absence she had lived with for so long. Helen's heart sank, disappointment flooding through her so intensely she almost couldn't breathe. It hadn't worked. She was still blind, then she saw light. Not bright, not clear, just a vague sense of something that wasn't darkness. She focused on it and slowly, very slowly, the light took shape. A window, sunlight streaming through glass. The edges were blurry and the colors were wrong, but it was there. "Daniel," she whispered. "I'm here." His hand squeezed hers. Helen turned her head toward his voice, and for the first time in 15 years, she saw her brother's face. It was blurry and indistinct, like looking through water, but she could make out the shape of him, the gray in his hair that she had forgotten about, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, the tears streaming down his cheeks. "I can see you," Helen said, and then she was crying too. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "I can see you." Over the next week, her vision improved rapidly. The blurriness faded. Colors became more distinct. By the 10th day, Helen could read text on a screen. By the 14th day, she could walk through the facility without assistance, taking in everything she had been missing. The world looked different than she remembered. Brighter, sharper, more complex. Marcus explained that the nanites had improved her visual cortex beyond its original state. She could now see into the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums, could distinguish colors most humans couldn't perceive. Her blindness had been reversed, and the technology had made her sight better than it had ever been. Helen spent a whole day just looking at things. She went to an art museum and stood in front of paintings for hours. She watched the sun set over the Alps, seeing colors she had never known existed. She looked at her own reflection in a mirror, studying the face that was familiar and strange at the same time. Older, marked by years of darkness, but still hers. When she returned to the lab, she saw the parasite for the first time through a microscope. It was beautiful in a terrible way, intricate and elegant, perfectly designed to do exactly what she had warned it would do. "Now we can really work," Helen said to her team, smiling. For the first time in 15 years, Helen Carter was whole again, and she had work to do. The news of Helen's restored sight spread through the Galactic Council like fire through dry grass. Within days, representatives from a dozen species requested meetings with Earth's medical division. Within weeks, the requests numbered in the hundreds. Everyone wanted to know about the neural regeneration technology. Everyone wanted access to it. Admiral Hughes called Helen to a private meeting in her office overlooking Lake Geneva. The Admiral looked older than she had at the exoneration hearing, her gray hair now completely white, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. They're circling like sharks, Hughes said without preamble. Every major species wants our technology. The Kresh offered us 3 mining colonies. The Talari offered a seat on their Trade Federation board. Even the Velkari have made inquiries, though they're being very careful about it. Helen stood by the window looking out at the water. She was still getting used to seeing again, still marveling at simple things like the way light reflected off the lake's surface. What do you want from me? I want to know if you're ready to be more than a researcher, Hughes said. Earth needs a face for our medical advancement. Someone the galaxy knows, someone they respect, someone who represents what we can do. You want me to be a symbol. I want you to be exactly what you are. A brilliant scientist who was wronged and has now been restored. Someone who proves that humanity doesn't give up on its people, and that we solve problems others can't. Helen turned from the window. And what about the cure? I'm close, Admiral. Another few months and we'll have a treatment for the parasite. I know. And when you announce it, you'll do it as the director of the new Human Medical Initiative. We're establishing it formally next week. Research facilities on 3 continents, partnerships with universities across Earth, and a mandate to share our medical advances with species that need them. Share, but not with everyone, Helen said, understanding the implication. Hughes nodded. We'll help anyone who asks honestly and treats us with respect. But the Velkari don't get access until they make real reparations. Not just apologies, but actual compensation for what they did to you. That seems petty. That seems like justice, Hughes corrected. They blinded you, Helen. They destroyed 15 years of your life because you threatened their pride. An apology costs them nothing. Real reparations? That costs something. That means something. Helen thought about it. Part of her wanted to simply give the technology away freely, to help everyone regardless of past grievances. But another part of her, the part that had spent 15 years in darkness, agreed with Hughes. Actions had consequences. The Velkari needed to understand that. All right, Helen said. I'll do it. But I choose who we help first. The people who need it most, not the ones with the best political connections. Deal. The Human Medical Initiative was announced at a council session 2 weeks later. Helen gave the speech herself, standing before the assembled representatives with her newly restored sight, taking in the strange and wonderful diversity of galactic civilization. She explained the neural regeneration technology in simple terms, described its potential applications, and laid out Earth's terms for sharing it. The reaction was immediate and intense. Species began lining up for partnerships. Earth's diplomatic staff was overwhelmed with requests. More importantly, humanity's position in the Council shifted dramatically. They were no longer the naive newcomers begging for acceptance. They were innovators, leaders, a species with something valuable to offer. Helen threw herself into her work with renewed energy. Having her sight back made everything easier, faster, more precise. She spent mornings in the lab working on the parasite cure and afternoons consulting with medical teams from across Earth. Researchers came to Geneva from everywhere, wanting to study under her, to learn from her, to be part of what humanity was building. 6 months after her sight was restored, Helen stood in her lab with her research team gathered around a holographic display. The display showed a molecular structure they had spent months perfecting. This is it, Helen said quietly. This is the cure. The cure worked by targeting the parasite's reproductive mechanism, preventing it from creating new copies of itself while the host's immune system cleared the existing infection. It was elegant, effective, and most importantly, it worked across multiple species. They had tested it on tissue samples from the Velkari, the Kresh, the Talari, and a dozen other infected species. The results were consistent. Helen prepared the announcement carefully. She drafted a paper detailing the cure's mechanism and efficacy. She created presentations for both scientific and general audiences, and then she made a decision that surprised even Admiral Hughes. I want to release the cure freely, Helen told the Admiral. No restrictions, no political conditions. Anyone who needs it can have it. Even the Velkari? Hughes asked. Especially the Velkari. The people dying on their world aren't the ones who hurt me. They're innocent. And I won't be like the Velkari Medical Authority. I won't let pride kill people. Hughes studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're a better person than I am, Dr. Carter. I'm just a scientist who doesn't want people to die. The announcement was broadcast across the entire council network. Helen stood in front of cameras, looking directly at the lens, and explained the cure in language anyone could understand. She detailed how it worked, how it should be administered, and how production could be scaled up quickly. She ended with a simple statement: "This cure is freely available to all species. No payment required, no political favors expected. The only thing I ask is that you distribute it fairly to those who need it most first, regardless of their wealth or status. Medical care should be about healing, not profit or politics." The response was overwhelming. Within days, production facilities on 20 worlds were manufacturing the cure. Within weeks, death rates from the parasite began dropping dramatically. Within 2 months, the outbreak was effectively contained. Helen received messages from people across the galaxy, parents thanking her for saving their children, doctors thanking her for giving them the tools they needed, leaders thanking her for her generosity and wisdom. The Velkari government sent a formal message requesting a meeting. Helen agreed to see their ambassador in Geneva. She met him in a conference room overlooking the lake, with Daniel and Admiral Hughes present as witnesses. The ambassador was young, probably born after Helen's trial. He looked nervous as he stood before her. "Dr. Carter, I am here on behalf of my government to offer formal reparations for the injustice done to you. We have established a fund of 10 million credits in your name, to be used for medical research as you see fit. We have also created the Carter Fellowship, a program that will bring young researchers from across the galaxy to study on the Velkari homeworld, in your honor." Helen listened quietly. 10 million credits was a substantial amount. The fellowship was an acknowledgement of her contributions that would last for generations. It was more than she had expected. "I accept," she said finally, "but I have one additional condition." The ambassador looked worried. "What condition?" "I want access to the Velkari medical archives. All of them. The ones you don't share with other species. I want to study them, to learn from them, and to publish anything I find that could help other researchers." The ambassador paled. The Velkari medical archives were their greatest treasure, the source of their authority and expertise. Sharing them would mean giving up secrets they had guarded for millennia, but he had no choice, and they both knew it. The Velkari's reputation was in ruins. Their authority as medical experts had been shattered. They needed this gesture to begin rebuilding trust. "Agreed," the ambassador said quietly. After he left, Admiral Hughes laughed out loud. "That was brilliant. Hugh just got access to the most valuable medical database in the galaxy." "I got access to knowledge that should have been shared centuries ago," Helen corrected. "Medicine isn't about hoarding information. It's about using knowledge to help people." Over the next year, Earth's influence in the Council grew steadily. They established their first off-world colony without needing Council permission, claiming a planet in a system the Velkari had previously controlled. They negotiated trade agreements as equals with species that had once looked down on them. They earned seats on important committees, not through political maneuvering, but through demonstrated competence and integrity. And at the center of it all was Helen Carter, the scientist who had been blinded for telling the truth, and who now led humanity's medical advances with vision clearer than ever before. Helen stood in her lab late one evening, looking at a sample of the parasite under her microscope. It was dead now, killed by the cure she had developed. She thought about the long journey from her trial to this moment, about the darkness and pain, about the vindication and restoration, about the work still ahead. Humanity had risen not through conquest or domination, but through persistence, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. They had taken their wounded and made them whole. They had turned injustice into triumph, and they had shown the galaxy that compassion combined with competence was a force more powerful than pride. Helen smiled and returned to her work. There were still diseases to cure. 5 years after her sight was restored, Helen stood at the entrance of the Earth Council Academy and looked up at the building with satisfaction. The academy was massive, built on the coast of California where the Pacific Ocean met Golden Cliffs. It was designed to train the next generation of diplomats, researchers, and medical professionals who would represent humanity and serve the broader galactic community. What made Helen most proud was the diversity of students walking through its halls. Yes, there were humans, young men and women from every continent on Earth, but there were also creche students with their crystalline skin that refracted light in rainbow patterns, Talari students whose fur changed color with their emotions, even a few Velkari, young ones who had been children during the outbreak who wanted to learn a different way of practicing medicine. The academy had been Daniel's idea, actually. Her brother had become her closest advisor over the past 5 years, helping her manage the growing responsibilities of the Human Medical Initiative, while keeping her grounded in what truly mattered. "You've spent your whole life learning," Daniel had said. "Now you need to teach. Pass it on." So Helen had agreed to teach one course per semester at the academy, always the same course: ethics in xenobiology and medical research. It had become the most popular class at the school, with students from dozens species competing for the limited seats. Today was the first day of the new semester. Helen walked through the corridors, nodding to students who recognized her. Some of them still stared, and Helen understood why. Her story had become something of a legend. The scientist who was blinded for telling the truth, who waited 15 years for justice, who helped save billions of lives. It was the kind of story that sounded too dramatic to be real, but it had happened, and she was living proof. The lecture hall was packed when Helen entered. Every seat filled and some students sitting on the floor. She recognized a few faces from previous semesters who had come back just to hear her speak again. Helen stood at the front of the room and waited for the conversations to die down. When she had everyone's attention, she began. "My name is Helen Carter. Some of you know my story. For those who don't, here's the short version. I discovered a dangerous parasite, tried to warn people about it, and was punished for speaking the truth. They blinded me. 15 years later, I was proven right. Humanity restored my sight, and we saved billions of lives." She paused, looking around the room at the young faces watching her so intently. "That story is dramatic, and it's true, but it's not the lesson I want to teach you. The lesson is this: being right is not enough. I was right about the parasite from day one. I had good data, solid research, clear evidence, but I failed to convince the people who needed to be convinced. I failed to present my findings in a way that the Velkari Medical Authority could accept without losing face. I failed to understand the political realities of the council. And because I failed at those things, millions of people died who didn't have to." A Velkari student in the third row raised her hand. Helen nodded to her. "Are you saying you should have stayed silent?" the student asked, her voice uncertain. "No," Helen said firmly. "I'm saying I should have been smarter about how I spoke. Truth is important, but so is wisdom. So is timing. So is understanding your audience. You can have the most important discovery in the galaxy, but if you can't communicate it effectively, if you can't navigate the systems that determine how knowledge is shared and accepted, then your discovery won't matter. People will suffer because of your failure, not because you were wrong, but because you couldn't convince others that you were right." She walked along the front of the room, making eye contact with different students. That's what this class is about. Not just the science of studying alien life, though we'll cover that. Not just the ethics of medical research, though that's crucial. This class is about learning how to be scientists in a political universe, how to speak truth to power without getting destroyed by it, how to challenge authority when necessary, while building alliances that let your work succeed, how to be both rigorous and diplomatic, both bold and wise. A human student raised his hand. "But Dr. Carter, didn't you ultimately succeed? You were vindicated, your research saved everyone, and humanity rose to prominence because of what happened to you." Helen smiled sadly. "I succeeded after 15 years of darkness and millions of deaths. That's not success. That's survival. Real success would have been convincing the Velkari to examine my research properly from the start. Real success would have been finding a way to warn the galaxy without threatening anyone's pride or position. Real success would have meant no one had to die." She let that sink in for a moment, then continued. "But you're right that something good came from the tragedy. Humanity learned important lessons. We learned that we couldn't just rely on being right. We needed to be strong, competent, and respected. We needed to build relationships and demonstrate value. When the outbreak happened, we didn't just say, 'We told you so.' We offered solutions. We helped people. We proved that we were worth listening to." The semester progressed, and Helen found teaching more rewarding than she had expected. Her students were passionate, curious, and thoughtful. They came from dozens of worlds, each bringing their own perspectives and assumptions about how science and medicine should work. Helen taught them about the parasite, of course, but also about other cases where medical knowledge had been suppressed or politicized. She taught them how to design research studies that would be accepted by multiple species. She taught them how to present findings that challenged established beliefs without making enemies. She taught them that being a good scientist meant being a good communicator, a good diplomat, and sometimes a good politician. One afternoon, Helen received an unexpected visit during her office hours. A young Velakari student named Kira entered nervously, clutching a data pad to her chest. "Dr. Carter, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course," Helen said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What's on your mind?" Kira sat down but didn't speak immediately. Finally, she said, "My grandfather was on the medical authority that examined your research. He was one of the ones who dismissed it." Helen felt her stomach tighten but kept her expression neutral. "I see. He died during the outbreak. The parasite killed him before your cure was distributed." Kira's voice was thick with emotion. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it." Helen leaned back in her chair, studying the young woman across from her. Kira couldn't have been more than 25 years old. She had been a child during Helen's trial, innocent of any wrongdoing. "Kira, why did you come to Earth? Why study at this academy?" "Because I want to be different," Kira said simply. "I want to be the kind of doctor who listens to evidence instead of ego, the kind of researcher who admits mistakes instead of doubling down on them. My grandfather was brilliant, but he was also proud and his pride killed him. I don't want to be like that." Helen felt something shift in her chest. This was why she taught. Not for revenge, not to prove anything, but for this. For the next generation who could learn from the past and build something better. "Your grandfather made a mistake," Helen said gently. "A terrible mistake that cost many lives, including his own. But Kira, you are not responsible for his choices. You're only responsible for your own. And choosing to come here to learn a different way, to be better than the generation before you, that's the right choice." Kira looked up with tears in her eyes. "Do you forgive them? The ones who hurt you?" Helen thought about the question carefully. "Forgiveness is complicated. I don't forgive the system that allowed my punishment to happen. I don't forgive the arrogance that dismissed good research because it came from a junior scientist from a new species. But the individuals, the specific people who made those choices, I've learned that holding on to anger toward them only hurts me. They've already paid for their mistakes, many of them with their lives. My job now is to make sure the next generation doesn't repeat those mistakes. Is that why you teach us? That's exactly why I teach you." Near the end of the semester, Helen was contacted by the Velkari government with an unusual request. They wanted to send a full delegation to Earth to learn about humanity's medical training methods. They wanted Helen to advise them on restructuring their medical education system. They were essentially asking their former victim to help them rebuild from the ground up. Admiral Hughes was skeptical when Helen told her about the request. "They have some nerve," the Admiral said. "After what they did to you, now they want your help reforming their entire medical system?" "Yes," Helen said, "and I'm going to help them." "Why?" "Because patients on the Velkari homeworld deserve doctors who will save their lives instead of protecting their own egos. Because the galaxy deserves a Velkari medical establishment that values truth over tradition. And because helping them reform is more powerful than holding grudges." The delegation arrived 2 weeks later. Helen spent 3 days with them, touring the academy, explaining humanity's approach to medical education, and sharing the lessons she had learned the hard way. The lead delegate, an older Velkari woman named Sira, listened carefully to everything Helen said.